Alright, so let's continue on our special topics on research ethics. This will be our talk before on federal regulations and IRB. We might not actually be able to finish IRB, the topic on IRB, but that's not a problem. We can resume next week. So previously we talked about several important historical documents that lay the foundation for contemporary guidelines and principles for conducting research in an ethical manner. So we talked about the Nuremberg Code, and we talked about the Declaration of Helsinki, and we did not talk about the Belmont Report. So today we'll be first of all, explain what this report is about, including its historical background. Well, in 1974, the National Commission for the Protection of Human Subjects in Biomedical and Behavioral Research was created for the U.S. Department of Health, Education, and Welfare. This department became known as the Department of Health and Human Services, and this was established actually in 1979. But anyway, the commission's charge was to identify ethical principles underlying research and to develop guidelines for respecting these principles. Although acknowledging the existence of other codes governing human research, such as the Nuremberg Code, such as the Declaration of Helsinki, the National Commission for the Protection of Human Subjects for Biomedical and Behavioral Research, thought that the other codes amounted to the list of regulations that may not actually allow the resolution of complex ethical questions. So the Commission postulated that looking at the topic more generally would allow the recognition of fundamental principles, and researchers could then appeal to these principles to resolve dilemmas for which the other codes have no answer to. And this process resulted in the report issued in 1979, which has a title, Ethical Principles and Guidelines for the Protection of Human Subjects of Research. And this is actually the Belmont Report, because the conference or the place of publication of this report is at Belmont, where the commission took place. The meetings of the commission took place. So the commission concluded that the primary principles underlying ethical research with human beings are the following: respect for persons, beneficence, and justice. And the methods used to recognize those principles are informed consent, risk-benefit analysis, and appropriate selection of subjects. So we'll be talking about each of these components: informed consent, risk-benefit analysis, and appropriate selection of subjects in later modules. Today we'll be talking or elaborating on these three general principles. As we saw, as we will see actually later on in our future modules, that these three principles, respect for persons, beneficence, and justice, really are the foundation that govern the protection of human subjects in scientific research. So it's essential to understand what these three principles are really about. In terms of respect for persons, this principle stipulates that researchers should, first of all, acknowledge and treat individuals as autonomous. And because of this recognition, researchers should protect those with limited autonomy, such as prisoners, such as children, etc. Well, pregnant women too. So these are, again, vulnerable population and special population that should be protected very well. It is for these reasons, I should say it is for this particular reason, right, to treat individuals as autonomous and protect autonomy of the population, especially special population. Informed consent will be and should be sought from each prospective subject or the subject's legally authorized representative. And that's when the subjects cannot or does not have the ability to provide legal informed consent, such as children. So if you try to recruit children to be part of your research, you should ask for the assent from the parents. And this is because regardless whether we use adults or non-adults for our research projects, we should acknowledge and treat their status of being autonomous. And all the informed consent forms shall be appropriately documented. Beneficence is the principle that obligates researchers to protect the well-being of subjects. So ethical research practices do not just protect human beings as autonomous, but it should also protect other aspects of the well-being of the subjects. They're basically, researchers should not do harm and should maximize possible benefits and minimize possible harms. To minimize the risks or potential harm to subjects, researchers should use procedures that are either well established or the procedures that are deemed as being consistent with good research design. And at the same time, the design that researchers propose should not entail unnecessary risks. Sometimes risks cannot be avoided. This is especially true for medical research and in some cases social scientific research. Later on we'll be talking about the Stanford PRISM study, which is very important, and in some cases people might say unethical research, or Milgram's obedience study. Again, it's a very important study, but it will probably violate some ethical standards. In any case, risks sometimes are inevitable. So in that case, the researchers should make sure not just to make lip services and just make a simple argument, but they should make sure that the risks to subjects should be reasonable in relation to anticipated benefits, if there's any, to subjects involved in the study. At the same time, researchers should justify the possible risks to subjects by emphasizing and demonstrating the importance of the knowledge that would result from conducting the study. So this beneficence principle actually has the roots in the utilitarian approach to research ethics, right? So because this principle emphasizes that the risks should be minimized and the benefits should be maximized, right? So do less harm, do more good. But very importantly though, the decision based on the principle of beneficence, should not depend on the possible long-term effects of the knowledge of the research. When you're reviewing research application as the ethical board, you should focus on the immediate impact of the research, because what might happen or what might not happen in the long run really is not within our control. The second principle is justice. This principle suggests that researchers should treat people fairly and to design research so that the burdens and benefits are shared equitably. In other words, you should not handpick subjects so that some subjects are exposed to more risks, whereas other subjects are going to receive more benefits. Sometimes, for example, when people are doing experiments, people do receive different treatment. For example, right? Some people might receive a prime of thinking about dangerous situations, whereas other subjects they're assigned to some other conditions where they're asked to think about peaceful situations. That is allowed actually, but it will only be allowed if the entire assignment or allocation of participants into different conditions is random. Right? So that means you, as the researcher, should not have control over which particular participants are assigned to which particular conditions. You should follow the random assignment principle so that everybody has the equal chance of receiving any condition. Which condition they end up being in is a different matter. So the selection of subjects, well, not just the random assignment of subjects into different conditions, but from the very beginning, your selection or your recruitment should be equitable. For example, in our department and in psych department, we advertise our research on SONA sites. So it is generally a good practice that you set as fewer pre-screening criteria as possible. Sometimes it is inevitable, right? Some studies do target a special segment of the population, and that's okay. But even within that special segment of population, you should not discriminate, right? You should give everybody a chance to be selected. And whether or not a particular subject is selected, that's a different story. But you should open the door to everybody, so to speak. And again, special attention should be paid to subjects from special and vulnerable populations. These include children, prisoners, pregnant women, mentally disabled persons, economically or educationally disadvantaged persons. Because these people, for various reasons, might not have the same chance as others to be selected and therefore to receive the benefit of participating in research. Therefore, whenever you're working with these populations or subjects from these populations, you should be very careful and cautious to give all these individuals in these segments the equal chance to be involved in research. Of course, with these three principles, they cannot be satisfied at the same time, right? So again, the three principles, beneficence, justice, and what is the third one? Oh, respect for persons. So these are, again, frameworks that will guide the resolution of ethical problems arising from research involving human subjects. But in many occasions, these three principles present competing claims for resolving ethical problems. For example, in some research projects, informing subjects about some aspects of the research would invalidate the research. For example, well, especially when people are doing experiments, right? Telling people what a certain procedure is might lead participants to answer the questions in a certain way, and that anticipation on the subject's part might invalidate the result of the research. So it's okay then for the researchers to say that, in the informed consent form, I do not state truthfully the purpose of the study, but later on, right, researchers should provide after the study a debriefing consent to tell participants the true purpose of the study. So in this case, the principle of respect for persons, typo here, the principle of respect for persons may be compromised in order to provide the greatest benefit, right? Because if the research cannot be properly done, then no benefits will be generated from this practice. So now we have a competing claim, right, between the principle of respect for persons and the principle of providing or maximizing benefits. So sometimes the principle of respect for persons will be sacrificed in order to maximize benefits. So the Belmont report really is general enough to apply to many fields of studies, as long as those studies involved human subjects. If we think about it, there are many different fields of research that involve human subjects: sociology, political science, communicology, communication, psychology, anthropology, etc. And sometimes biologies too. So each subfield has probably its own ethical guidelines or ethical codes. It turns out that communication and communicology, they follow the ethical code of the American Psychological Association. So that's why it's important to talk about APA's ethics code. APA's ethical code is a sort of these ethical codes derive from the Bellman report. So they sound a lot similar. For example, the first principle, principle A of APA's ethics code, states that is based on beneficence and non-malfeasance. Principle B of the ethical codes is about fidelity and responsibility. Principle C is integrity. Principle D is justice, and principle E is respect for people's rights and dignity. So we actually talk about beneficence when we're talking about the Bellman report. We talk about justice as well in the previous slides, as well as respect for persons' rights and dignity. And principle B and C, fidelity and responsibility and integrity, are additional content that APA adds to the Bellman report. So we'll be talking about principle B and principle C. Principle B, fidelity and responsibility, states that psychologists should establish a relationship of trust with those people that they work with. That means psychologists should be aware of the professional and scientific response. They should trust the subjects in a sense that the subjects would do their best to provide the answers psychologists are looking for. Also, psychologists should be aware of the professional and scientific responsibilities to the society, right? So psychologists, they're supposed to advance knowledge in regard to human psychology and behavior, and also they should be aware of their responsibilities to the specific communities in which they work. For example, many psychologists work in universities, so they also have a responsibility to their students as well as to their colleagues And psychologists should uphold professional standards of conduct. They should clarify their professional roles and obligations. And if anything bad happened, they should accept appropriate responsibilities for their behavior or misbehavior. The principle of integrity says psychologists, they are the people who seek to promote accuracy, honesty, and truthfulness in the science, teaching, and practice of psychology. That means in each of those activities, psychologists should not steal, cheat, or engage in fraud or intentional misrepresentation of fact. In situations where deception is ethically justifiable, psychologists have a serious obligation to consider the need for, the possible consequence of, and their responsibility to correct any resulting mistrust or other harmful effects that may result from deception. So as I said before, for many psychological experiments, telling subjects the true purpose of study might actually jeopardize the research purpose, because once the subjects knows the true purpose of study, they might answer questions in one way or the other, and that's not good for the researchers. So sometimes psychologists have to lie to the subjects, telling some cover stories, so that to minimize the suspicion of subjects on the purpose of study. So this principle says, after researchers lie to participants, they should, in the end, tell truthfully everybody what the research is really about, so that the relationship between researchers and subjects will not deteriorate or will not be harmed by these intentional deceptive activities. Okay, so as we said, we actually will not be talking about IRB in this module, and we'll resume next time on the role of IRB and what IRB actually does. Okay, see you next time.